Good morning, and call this meeting of the Aviation Subcommittee hearing to order on looking forward to the future of America's aviation maintenance and manufacturing workforce. I want to I think I just said the subcommittee will come to order. Maybe I didn't say it that way, but I said it. I ask unanimous consent the chair be authorized to declare recess during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. So I want to thank today's witnesses for joining the Aviation Subcommittee discussion today on the future of America's aviation maintenance and manufacturing workforce. At the beginning of the 116th Congress, I set a forward-looking agenda for the subcommittee, Aviation and Aerospace 2050, to focus on fostering technological innovation, ensuring safety, and improving the nation's competitiveness in the global aviation and aerospace marketplace. To ensure the U.S. remains at the forefront of aviation and aerospace, industry, federal agencies, and Congress must continue to explore how to recruit and train the future aviation workforce. Maintenance and manufacturing are key reasons why the U.S. aviation and aerospace industry is such a powerful economic engine. This topic hits particularly close to home for me. The Pacific Northwest is the aviation capital of the world. In my home state of Washington State, more than 136,000 highly skilled aviation workers produce an estimated 1,400 aircraft and unmanned aircraft systems, or UAS, each year. Snohomish County, where I was born and raised, and I get to, in part represent, is home to nearly 50% of the aviation and aerospace jobs in my state. In 2018, Congress passed the longest federal aviation administration reauthorization in decades. The bipartisan 5-year law includes a comprehensive workforce development title to support important aerospace jobs across the U.S. and to help the aviation industry prepare and diversify its future workforce. Among its provisions, the law authorizes a key aviation maintenance workforce grant program to support the education and recruitment of aviation maintenance technicians, establishes a Women in Aviation Advisory Board to encourage women and girls to pursue rewarding aviation careers, and includes my provision to create a new Youth Access to American Jobs and Aviation Task Force to encourage high school students to enroll in aviation manufacturing, maintenance, and engineering apprenticeships. And on today's first panel of witnesses are Kate Lang, the FAA's Senior Advisor for Aviation Workforce Outreach, and Heather Kraus, the Government Accountability Office's Director of Civil Aviation Issues. So today, Ms. Lang, I expect your testimony will offer substantive updates on the administration's efforts to swiftly implement the FAA reauthorization bill's workforce requirements and other efforts to address aerospace workforce-related challenges. And Ms. Kraus, I look forward to hearing more about the barriers to enhancing workforce development pipeline. While globalization and the emergence of new markets present opportunities for American aviation, there are challenges. For example, according to the Aviation Technician Education Council, 30% of the aviation maintenance technician workforce is at or near retirement age. And although today's hearing focuses on the U.S. aviation maintenance and manufacturing workforce, the issues faced by U.S. aerospace employers are reflective of broader issues across the industry. Witnesses on our second panel play an important role in the aviation maintenance and manufacturing pipeline, and I have seen firsthand how some of this federal funding is having a positive impact on the recruitment of a more diverse aviation maintenance workforce in my state. Women currently make up less than 3% of the aviation maintenance workforce nationwide, but with the aid of a National Science Foundation grant, Everett Community College's Advanced Manufacturing Training and Education Center, or AMTEC, is partnering with local school districts and the industry to increase recruiting of women into its aerospace technicians program by 30% over the next 3 years. I've also visited Edmonds Community College's Washington State Aerospace Training and Research, or WATER Center, located at Payne Field in my district, where with the help of GI Bill benefits and other financial assistance programs, students learn the skills necessary for high-wage, high-demand aerospace and manufacturing jobs in just 12 weeks. Aviation High School and Vaughn College in New York are here today and are innovative educational leaders whose programs produce future aviation maintenance technicians and engineers. So Mr. Jackson and Ms. DeVivo, when you're on the panel, on the second panel, I look forward to hearing more about your efforts and what the FAA or Congress can do to improve outdated maintenance curricula and to reduce the amount of debt for students. Key employers like Delta Airlines and Republic Airways will shed light on recruiting and retaining skilled workers. So Mr. McDermott and Ms. Donati, I am interested in hearing more about your company's work to expand the pipeline of qualified workers, particularly to women, people of color, and other historically underrepresented groups. And lastly, manufacturers like Gulfstream depend on a skilled workforce to remain competitive in the U.S. and abroad. So Mr. Neely, when you're on the panel today, I look forward to hearing your recommendations on addressing the skills gap and what is on the horizon for U.S. maintenance and manufacturing workforce. The future of America's aviation maintenance and manufacturing workforce is bright, but it is clear Congress can do more to ensure the U.S. remains at the forefront of aviation and aerospace. Today's hearing does provide this subcommittee with the opportunity to reaffirm its commitment to supporting U.S. jobs and the aviation workforce. Improving skills training and diversifying the aviation workforce is an all-around win for employers, for job seekers, and for the aviation and aerospace sectors. So I want to thank you again, give a thank you again to today's witnesses, and look forward to our discussion. And with that, I want to now turn to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Graves, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm always offended every time I hear you come up here and talk about all the high-tech things you have going on up in the Pacific Northwest. We have Mardi Gras, alligators, king cakes. You don't hold a candle to us. That's right, we do. Clay Higgins even. Cajun John Wayne. Y'all look that up on YouTube at some point. It's worth it. As the chairman said, we had our opening hearing on Aviation 2050, and it was a fascinating hearing because we had the opportunity to truly look to the future of aviation, to sit and talk about the aviation, supersonic passenger travel, to talk about the role of drones and other new technologies delivering everything from food to parcels to people in regard to urban aerial transportation. And of course, commercial space travel, commercial passenger passenger space travel. It really is extraordinary to think about the future. The aviation industry today is the largest sector in terms of our net trade benefits. We do more exports of aviation materials or aviation related technologies than any other sector. It's a very important part of our economy. In fact, according to a 2016 FAA study, it constitutes $1.6 trillion in annual economic activity, supporting millions and millions of jobs in the United States, and a couple of them are up in the Northwest, I believe. So this is really important, but when you start projecting forward, the aviation industry has found that we're looking at shortages to the tune of 754,000 jobs over the next 20 years in terms of maintenance techs, and 790,000 jobs in terms of pilots. This doesn't even take into consideration the innovation that I noted. So let me go back through that again. We've got this huge future in regard to the future of aviation, the innovation, the technology that is before us. We have the nation that has led this, and it is a very important part of our economy. It's an important part of our exports in the United States. But we're looking potentially in some sectors of aviation, looking at over half of the workforce being proximate to retirement age. So we've got to make sure that we're all collectively working together. And I want to emphasize that, all of us, because this is not, Ms. Lang, as you well know, this isn't all on the shoulders of the FAA. While you do play a role, and one thing I want to make mention of, and I know the chairman shares the concern and the priority, is updating the curriculum. The current curriculum was written before I was born. I don't know, maybe that's not that old, but I think it is. We need to make sure that each entity is focused on their respective role. I know that Republic Airlines has recently invested in a training academy. Again, I know, Ms. Lang, that you are working on updating the curriculum, which is something that's very important. We need to make sure that we're working with our aviation schools, including in the state that I represent, Louisiana Tech University has an aviation program, to ensure that we're attracting the appropriate students into the right curriculums. And The chairman noted the huge opportunities we have in terms of diversity with African Americans, with women, Hispanic, and other populations that are clearly underrepresented in the repair fields as well as in the mechanic fields. So look forward to working with all of you. Looking forward to the FAA and GAO testimony in terms of your suggestions and recommendations, and in particular looking forward to hearing your thoughts on how the FAA authorization bill we did in 18, which had a workforce title, will help to address some of the challenges we have before us. With that, Mr. Chairman, yield back.
Thank you, Representative Graves. Now turn to the ranking member of the full committee, Representative Graves of Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. This hearing is very important, and I appreciate you doing this. The pipeline of people seeking careers in aerospace has been running low for years. We know that. And projected growth in the commercial aviation, makes an already serious situation even more critical. Aerospace careers, including piloting, maintenance, manufacturing, engineering, they offer pathways to well-paying careers that are in demand. These are the kinds of jobs that you can raise a family on while also having the flexibility to find work in just about any part of the country. And despite these benefits and despite the demand, companies across the aerospace industry, they do face challenges recruiting and retaining well-qualified professionals. At the same time, the industry is contending with forecasted growth. It also faces an impending baby boomer retirement wave, workers moving to other industries, and high barriers to those who might want to pursue an aviation career. Congress recognized the impending workforce crisis and responded by including an entire aviation workforce, as was pointed out by Ranking Member Graves, title in the 2018 FAA reauthorization bill, including my bill to invest $5 million in aviation technician workforce training. Much of the work that was directed by that law is underway, and I look forward to hearing from the FAA and the GAO about those efforts. Additionally, there have been several bills introduced this Congress to address aerospace workforce shortages and entry barriers. And I wholeheartedly support the efforts to deal with the barriers to entry and ensure a steady, more reliable pipeline of well-qualified and diverse aerospace professionals. I look forward to working in a bipartisan way to address the workforce shortages. But I do believe that we have to be very thoughtful in addressing the workforce needs. The FAA should not be replacing the role that industry and other government agencies must play in these efforts. And I know several on the panel and throughout the industry have programs in place to help attract new workers, and I look forward to hearing more about how the FAA can complement those efforts. So as we continue the conversation and consider legislation to address aerospace workforce issues, we must be mindful not to pull the FAA in too many directions. As I said in the beginning, this hearing is very important. It is important not just to the future success of the U.S. aerospace industry, but to the hardworking men and women who make up the aerospace workforce. With that, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and I thank everyone for being here, and I yield back the balance.
Thank you, Representative Graves, Ranking Member. I want to now welcome the witnesses on the panel. Ms. Kate Lang is the Senior Advisor for Aviation Workforce Outreach at the Federal Aviation Administration. And Ms. Heather Krause is the Director, Physical Infrastructure Issues at the Government Accountability Office, or GAO. Thanks for being here today. We look forward to your testimony. Without objection, our witnesses' full statements will be included in the record. Since it has been included in the record, the subcommittee requests you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes each. All right. With that, recognize Ms. Lang for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman DeFazio and Larsons and Ranking Members Graves and Graves, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Catherine Lang, or Kate, as everyone calls me, and I'm pleased to be here today to provide you with an update on the FAA's workforce priorities. The FAA's primary mission as a safety oversight organization is to ensure the overall safety of the national aviation system. Success in completing our mission continually depends on our ability to recruit a new generation of dynamic and highly skilled workers, not just at the FAA, but throughout the aerospace industry. Technological advances have helped us to minimize risk, but ultimately, people, not technology, will help us to the next level of safety and organizational and operational excellence. An increasing share of today's technical workforce is moving toward retirement, and the pipeline of aviation professionals that support the industry have shown signs of slowing. For this reason, we are examining the trends and working with our industry partners to identify and ensure that we have an adequate workforce. In collaboration with industry, academia, and other government agencies, we will work to remove unnecessary barriers to entering the aviation workforce, to enhance educational pathways, and to build a pipeline of qualified aviation professionals. This is the main reason I took the role of the Senior Advisor to the FAA Administrator on Aviation Workforce Outreach, having just finished a 6-year assignment in Brussels as the FAA's Regional Director for Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. In my new role, I will serve as the FAA's focal point for engaging with all of our stakeholders in the aviation community collectively to recruit and develop the next generation of aerospace professionals. I've also been asked to chair the Aviation Workforce Steering Committee that the FAA established last year. The goal of the committee is to assess the current aviation workforce challenges from the perspective of pipelines, pathways, and partnerships, and to identify concrete actions we can take to address those challenges. We will have a special focus on diversifying the workforce by attracting women, minorities, and persons with disabilities. Another role of the steering committee is to help provide leadership, guidance, and oversight to the FAA science, technology, engineering, math, and space education programs, better known as AVSED. Originally established in 1961, the AVSED program gives young people a glimpse of the wide range of exciting career opportunities available in aerospace. We support initiatives like Aviation Career Education, or ACE Camps, Girls in Aviation Days, and many, many other events with elementary, middle, high school, and colleges across the country. The success of AVSED relies heavily on FAA volunteer outreach representatives who engage directly with local communities. We more than doubled the number of our outreach representatives from 2018 to 2019, and this year we have already reached our goal of signing up more than 1,100 FAA volunteers. We also launched an Adopt a School pilot program in Texas and Maryland, where outreach representatives will connect with students to generate excitement in aviation. Youth participation in national, regional, and local AVSED events is rising rapidly. Last year, we reached nearly 60,000 students, more than double the previous year. In the FAA 2018 reauthorization, Congress recognized the importance of these collaborative efforts to recruit, train, and retain aviation talent. You enacted numerous workforce-related provisions, all of which we are working to implement. Your priorities are the starting point for our work within the FAA. An example is the establishment of a new aviation workforce development program for education and recruitment of pilots and aviation maintenance technicians. Industry has expressed its concerns about having an adequate supply of pilots and technicians to meet the growing global demand for pilots and technicians. Forecasts show that we will need about 200,000 pilots and about 200,000 technicians over the next 20 years in North America alone. As directed by Congress, the FAA is finalizing the program and intends to issue a call for proposals later this year. We are also taking steps to implement the unmanned aircraft workforce provisions in the 2018 bill, including a specific focus on community college training programs. UAS are a great entry point into aviation. The advancement and proliferation in UAS applications are creating new opportunities for the next generation. Also, as directed in reauthorization, last year we began the process of launching 2 advisory groups, one to encourage women and girls to join the aviation workforce, and the other to encourage high school students to pursue aviation careers. We are currently reviewing applications and plan to announce membership for both of these groups later this spring. As I stated earlier, we recognize the importance that workforce development has on the overall safety of the national airspace system, and we are committed to collaborating with industry, academia, and other government agencies to develop solutions to the workforce needs of today and for those of the future. We are grateful for the support of this committee that you have provided in all areas related to workforce. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Krause for 5 minutes.
Chairman Larson, Ranking Members Graves, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss our work on the aviation maintenance workforce. Each year, hundreds of millions of passengers rely on airlines to get them safely to their destination, rendering public confidence and safety critical to the aviation industry. A sufficient supply of aviation maintenance workers is necessary for ensuring a safe and robust aviation system. Federal and aviation industry stakeholders have expressed concern over the capacity of this workforce to meet projected needs due to retirements, attrition, and the growing demand for air travel. In addition to these concerns, rapidly changing technology has implications for the training of this workforce. My statement today will focus on 1, what federal data reveal about the aviation maintenance workforce, 2, how federal agencies and other key stakeholders provide support in developing this workforce, and 3, FAA's progress in updating the curriculum and testing standards for mechanics. First, federal data reveals some information on the characteristics of this workforce. They show that there are roughly 330,000 FAA certificated aviation maintenance technicians as of December 2018. Over half of them are between the ages of 50 and 70, and 3% are women. In terms of the pipeline, FAA certificated roughly 8,600 aviation maintenance technicians on average each year from 2014 through 2018, and the most common pathway to becoming certificated is attending aviation maintenance technician or AMT school. Federal data on demand project an annual average of roughly 12,000 job openings, a growth of 3% annually for both FAA certificated and non-certificated workers in the U.S. from 2018 to 2028. However, there are some limitations to what the federal data can tell us about this workforce. For example, the number of individuals that are certificated likely overestimates the number of them working in the aviation industry, since the data do not identify how many are retired, deceased, or working in other industries. Also, there are no comprehensive data on the number of non-certificated aviation maintenance workers. Employers we interviewed expressed differing perspectives on the potential growth and the demand for aviation maintenance workers. Some, including small and medium-sized employers, said that they've experienced difficulty finding enough workers to meet their needs. However, others, including large employers such as major commercial carriers, said they've experienced less difficulty, but acknowledged the competitive market for aviation maintenance workers. To develop this workforce, various federal agencies, educational institutions, and businesses have programs that support individuals pursuing aviation maintenance careers. For example, DoD has a program to help service members translate their military experience, such as aircraft maintenance, into civilian occupations. The Department of Labor has a program that awarded almost $3.8 million in grants and contracts from 2014 through 2018 to promote apprenticeships for aviation maintenance workers. States, employers, and schools are also partnering on various efforts. For example, one repair station we interviewed started a program to recruit students out of high school. FAA has also taken some steps to engage and coordinate with these and other groups on aviation workforce development initiatives. Our report that issued last week identified opportunities for FAA to further enhance its workforce development efforts. In particular, we recommended that FAA leverage existing data and coordinate with other federal agencies to advance its goal of promoting a robust, qualified, and diverse aviation maintenance workforce. Finally, ensuring that aviation maintenance training and skill requirements are current is important because of ongoing and rapid changes in aviation technology. However, aviation stakeholders we interviewed said that the current AMT curriculum requirements, which are decades old and established in regulation, do not emphasize commonly used modern aircraft technologies, such as avionics and composite materials. FAA has also acknowledged that these requirements and testing standards are outdated and are working to revise them. We have been reporting on some of these issues since the early 2000s and believe it's important for them to be addressed. In close, both the federal government and aviation industry benefit from having a professional, trained, and qualified workforce. Addressing aviation workforce needs is a shared responsibility among the different aviation stakeholders. It is important for federal agencies to coordinate efforts to effectively support this workforce and ensure a safe and robust aviation system. This concludes my statement. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Thank you both for an enlightening testimony and helpful testimony to get us started on questions. So we'll move on now to member questions. Each member will be recognized for 5 minutes, and I'll start by recognizing myself. First for Ms. Kraus, your testimony mentions that the FAA does not routinely analyze, collect, or coordinate with other stakeholders on certain data related to workforce development, but it sounds like you've recommended that it do that. Can you elaborate on the potential impacts of this gap on workforce development efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we found is that there are various data sources out there that give you insight into different components of the workforce. So, for example, with the data on FAA workforce that's certificated, you can get a sense of sort of some demographic data. I mean, FAA also has data related to repair stations and the number of certificated and non-certificated workforce. But I think as they're kind of pursuing these new efforts to really look at all these available sources that both they have and other sources have, and sort of identifying where are the gaps in terms of what might be able to address some of the issues with the workforce, whether it's bringing in more diverse populations or building other pathways. We think that there's ways that you could really leverage different data sources both within and outside government.
Okay. Ms. Lang, presumably the workforce development efforts are nested in other agencies, Department of Labor, and then at the state level, Washington State would be Employment Security Department and a variety of other agencies. So it sounds like we have a lot of examples of a lot of people trying to do a lot of things. Can you address how FAA might approach trying to get a common effort established for workforce development in this particular area?
Thank you. I mean, it's really evident. I've spent much of the last few weeks reading a lot of the literature, and I think there is a profound desire to better understand the nature of the problem we're wrestling with, because we need to know how serious of a gap we may have, or what are the best solutions to tailor to meeting the workforce requirements. So absolutely, I think the FAA, one of the major things the steering committee is going to do is to create a group that works intergovernmentally with other sister agencies. Clearly, the Department of Labor and Education have very important roles, especially in the areas of data collection. But I really appreciate the point that you've made that we've also got to work with state agencies that also, closer to the issues, have data we have to do. So I think you're going to be seeing more from us, and I'll take your point that we really need to make sure we loop in our state partners as well.
Just to follow up on another point in the GAO's report, and this is for Ms. Lang, has to do with the maintenance curriculum standards. I think we have established they're at least as old as Garrett Graves, if not older. But as of October 2019, the agency officials said they were in the process of reviewing stakeholder comments. When do you anticipate a final rule on this issue being released on the standards for maintenance curriculum?
The FAA's stated goal is to get it done before the end of the year, and I'm certainly, again, this is an area where there's unanimity of view that we've got to get this over the finish line, and that is a message I'm definitely going to be chatting with Administrator Dixon about, that we really have to put agency priority in getting this done.
I think you'll hear that from other members as well, how important this is. Ms. Lang, how specifically are you going to begin to address the barriers faced by women, people of color, and other historically underrepresented groups in providing pathways into aviation and aerospace?
You know, this is really going to have to be a multi-tiered effort. I mean, Congress has clearly given us some direction to work and convene an aviation task force to really look at this question, and we are well on our way to getting that started. I think there's a lot of ideas out there. The FAA also has great partnership with our employees' associations, and we are working right now, we're trying to catalog with my colleagues in civil rights and human resources all the efforts the FAA has to make sure that we are on a path to promote those programs, but more importantly, that we begin to see some results and outcome as a result of those efforts. But frankly, this is something we all own in the industry. And as we really expand the outreach we're doing with our industry partners in academia, this has got to be front and center. We've got areas of chronic underrepresentation that simply have to be addressed, particularly in the maintenance area.
Yeah, Ms. Krause, I have a very short time. On that last question, does GAO have any specific recommendations?
I mean, I think we've just done work and maybe would offer that stakeholders have also emphasized the importance of increasing diversity and are looking at different pathways. So I think folks are interested in trying to address these issues as well.
All right, thanks. With that, I'll now turn to recognize Ranking Member Graves from Louisiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lang, as you know, the FAA recently had their statutory authority to actually promote the aviation industry removed in statute. How do you, with the huge influence that the FAA has over the pipeline of the workforce, how do you balance that role of safety regulator yet, to some degree, advocate of industry and of those occupations? Could you talk about that a little bit? Does that question make sense?
You know, it really makes a lot of sense. This is something I know the FAA has wrestled with since the Value Jet accident. And I think we really do understand that we have a responsibility to always preserve, without question, the efficacy of our oversight capabilities and the ability for the public to have confidence that we're always, first and foremost, putting safety forward. You know, but that said, there are clearly things we and only we can do as a regulator that get out of the way of things that are injuring the ability for the workforce of the pipeline to be developed. I think all of the interest in getting Part 147 finished is a great example that we need to stay current and modernize our regulations to keep pace with the changing demands and the new information and sciences that are available to us. So I think we've got to make sure we're doing everything to, you know, transparently balance both our role as a regulator and as our role to make sure that we're part of the facilitation and not part of the problem in advancing workforce issues.
Thank you. Ms. Krause, analysis by the GAO found that there were hiring difficulties, workforce difficulties in aviation and aerospace. Could you, and I know you have extensive testimony that was submitted, but could you talk a little bit about sort of the cause and what you found there and how we may be able to help address some of those? And I want to reemphasize what I said in my opening statement. I think we need to be very careful about stepping on one another's turf or territory. I think there's a role for government. I think there's a role for industry. There's a role for our colleges, universities.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's a number of programs, both at industry and government levels and educational institutions that are going on. I think it is really trying to make sure that the efforts that are being carried out, including the ones in the FAA bill, are really effectively targeting and not overlapping other programs and sort of targeting areas that there are sort of real needs. So I think it is really kind of focusing on making sure the programs are sort of all moving in the right direction and sort of filling in various gaps that might exist.
Thank you. Ms. Lang, what work is the FAA doing, or are you doing anything to help to identify and sort of inventory some of the barriers to workforce development or just helping to sort of improve that pipeline of the aviation workforce by helping to, you know, sort of recalibrate the barriers to entry that are under the FAA's jurisdiction? Are you working to do that now, and what can we expect in terms of path forward? And look, we all understand that many of those are for safety. For example, I don't think anybody here would suggest that we don't need to have proper training or experience before we put people working on planes or of course, in the cockpit.
You know, again, I am struck by the fact that over the last few weeks, as I've really, as I've come into this position and read the literature, there is a very long list and a lot of opinions about where the barriers are and the things we need to do to deal with pipeline and pathway opportunities and issues. I think the FAA is right now committed to looking at all of those. I mean, we will be implementing the areas where Congress has explicitly asked us to do some work, both with women in the industry, with students. There are clearly a very long list of barriers we're going to have to deal with, from education to the time it takes to be able to get into, in some career paths, frontline positions. We're going to have to look at all of those. Again, some of those we're going to be looking at internally at the FAA within our own workforce. We do have to look at what we can do with sister federal agencies like labor, education, Veterans Affairs, to improve the availability of loan programs, subsidies, incentives There's a lot of ideas out there that we need to sit down and champion some of these within the federal government. And again, there are those things that we do that are part of the barriers that we have to take stock of and own. But again, I think you've stated it very well. This is something everybody in this community owns. I mean, we've got to get out there. The FAA will be doing outreach. We want to hear first person. I'm really looking forward to the next panel. We need to hear the voices of the people on the front line about the things we collectively need to do and what industry is doing to help, promote a strong and robust workforce of the future.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, you noted this, but I just think it's noteworthy. You have 2% of aircraft mechanics, 4% of pilots are women, 3% of commercial pilots are African American, and only 7% of commercial pilots are Hispanic or Latino. So certainly, I think we have some opportunity in those communities. Yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Graves. I now turn to Representative Lipinski of Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Holding this important hearing on aviation workforce, certainly something you hear about all the time, is the growing need in this area. I'm fortunate enough to have Lewis University located in my district in Romeoville, and their aviation and transportation department does tremendous work training students in aviation career fields, including aviation maintenance. Lewis University is a critical piece in training the next generation of aviation workers. And in fact, I was out there a couple weeks ago for an event to welcome a retired American Airlines McDonnell Douglas MD-80. Now, this aircraft can be able to provide students at Lewis University with more opportunities to earn FAA certificates to become a mechanic. So it's great to see that opportunity. As a former engineer, I appreciate how important it is to have the opportunities for the hands-on experience. Lewis University graduates will now be able to enter the aviation workforce with the best possible training and experience. So I want to ask Ms. Lang, how is the FAA partnering with schools like Lewis to encourage students to pursue careers in aviation, especially aviation maintenance and manufacturing?
Thank you. I began my aviation career in Chicago, and I'm very, very aware of the deep aviation roots in Illinois. I think Lewis, like any number of the academic institutions, first of all, ought to take advantage of some of the programs that are now in the reauthorization bill related to workforce development. But I can assure you, we are very much interested in working with academia to also hear from academia what they need from us. One of the things we're doing at the FAA, when I joined the agency, we had a very robust STEM AVSET program in the field. And we are literally in the process of rebuilding that. And I think you can expect that our regional administrators and their outreach representatives are going to be going out to all of our aviation institutions and community colleges to see what we can do in partnership to advance STEM. So if you have particular ideas, please let us know. But they should absolutely be in touch with FAA as we double up our efforts in this area.
Thank you. And I wanted to follow up on that with the issue that Ranking Member Sam Graves had raised in his opening statement. The 2018 FAA reauthorization bill, I partnered with Ranking Member Graves on Section 625 for the establishment of 2 new programs for workforce development, one for pilots and the other for maintenance technicians. The recent appropriations bill saw $5 million for each of these 2 programs. What is the FAA doing right now to get these 2 grant programs up and running? I think it's very important that we move quickly on this. So, Ms. Lang?
Well, I'm really happy to report that the FAA is moving out quickly on these. It's a brand new program, both of these programs, and they come with them the requirements of a lot of prerequisites you have to do, like the Paperwork Reduction Act. Those processes were started last November and are underway, and we hope to get wrapped up in the next 2-3 months. We also received the necessary appropriations, as you pointed out, in the FY20 bill in December. So those are underway. While we are finishing the processes one has to go through to stand up a program, though, our teams are right now working on the initial eligibility and application requirements. The program is drawing a lot of attention. We understand from the legislation there's a desire that we should consult with interested parties, and we will be doing that. And we hope to be getting that criteria and those details out later this year on both programs.
Do you have a sense, are you going to have will the grant money be given out in this fiscal year?
I can say categorically it will be started in this fiscal year. It's part of it is going to be a function of how quickly we can get through the prerequisite programs, but we understand the sense of urgency that Congress has, and we are keeping a very close track of making sure we're hitting the milestones as quickly as we can. And I will be a dog with a bone on any place where it's getting stuck.
I appreciate that, and I will continue to follow up, and I would appreciate you could keeping in touch with me in my office on the movement on that. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I now turn to Representative Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to both of you for being here today. First, Ms. Kraus, regarding, aside from the aviation maintenance workforce, what does GAO know about the status of the pilot supply issue?
Yeah, we had looked at the pilot supply issue back in 2018 and did a labor market analysis where we found those indicators were all consistent with a shortage when it comes to pilots. I mean, I think also as part of that work, we did find some positive signs as well in terms of enrollment being up at some of the schools and wages increasing in sort of response. But nonetheless, there's still challenges in meeting the demand of the pilot supply. And so that we have found to be differing factors like the cost of education and sort of in retaining flight instructors. We have some work that's ongoing that'll further update that and kind of be able to provide more insight into that issue.
Regarding the cost of degrees, what can you tell us about how much of a barrier that is for entry, and if so, what are the policy recommendations that you expect the study to recommend?
Yeah, I think that what we found in that more recent work is that when students are seeing a clear career path to a position, that makes the cost a little more, palatable. Like they sort of see where their education's going to take them. So I feel like that is something that has been positive in terms of getting enrollment up, of like seeing a career path going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Kraus. Ms. Lang, how is the FAA and DOT working together to help veterans with aviation experience transition into civilian workforce?
You know, we actually have a number of initiatives in this area. I will say that the department actually set up a program called Forces to Flyers, and that program is being conducted by DOT at the Volpe Center. We're quite anxious to see how that program, it's a research program, we're anxious to see the report that comes out of that this summer. The appropriations bill, likewise, had a provision for the FAA to implement with respect to veterans and facilitating veterans being able to get into flight instructions in schools. We'll be working that as well. But I would also note, when we had a symposium a year ago, I guess it was in the fall of 2018, we partnered with the Air Force in that program, and we've subsequently now done a memorandum of understanding with the Air Force to see what we can do working with them to both learn from their experiences of streamlining getting pilots trained and into the workforce, but also what we need to do working jointly to make the transition from military service to civilian service faster and more readily available. We're also working with the Department of Defense and Teamsters on a new program to improve or streamline where we can the certification of mechanics coming out of the military into the civilian workforce. So that's just the initial set of initiatives. I think you're probably going to see more. If you have any ideas, we certainly would welcome those.
And as far as, Ms. Lang, as far as new entrants, unmanned aircraft, commercial space transportation, do you see that as attracting new people, young people into the industry?
Well, the numbers don't lie. I mean, the number of registrations we have related to drones and pilot licensing and training and all of that, there's definitely, it is one of the areas of the buzz in the industry. And again, this is where we agree with Congress in setting up a program in the reauthorization to work with community colleges to see what we can do to develop curriculums and application process for CTIs or collegiate training programs related to drone activities. So again, it's a burgeoning area, and we're quite anxious to get, there's a lot of things that are making people very excited about it. We're trying to piggyback on that excitement to get people interested in aviation. Drones are a great way in.
Great, thank you, Ms. Lang. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now recognize Representative Stanton of Arizona for 5
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for organizing this very important hearing. Section 625 of the 2018 FAA reauthorization directed the FAA to establish new grant programs to support maintenance technician recruitment and training and pilot education. Those programs were authorized at $5 million annually, and they do have broad bipartisan and industry support, and they were fully funded as part of the fiscal 2020 appropriations process. Congressman Lipinski asked a question about that, so I won't reiterate the question, but only make the point that time is of the essence. We've already lost 1 year on the 5-year authorization time period, and the agency should stand up a program as quickly as possible to ensure that the money gets out of the door in time for the 2021 academic year, so that the money we've appropriated can be put to work as quickly as possible. I know you're working on that, but I want to make sure you hear from myself and I'm sure other members of this body. It's really important. Question for Ms. Lang, although Ms. Krause, you can answer it if you'd like it as well. The FAA predicts more than 50% of the current science and engineering workforce in the industry is expected to hit retirement age, with half of the 330,000 FAA certificated mechanics and repairmen as of December 2018 between 50 and 70 years old. The GAO also reported that nearly 70% of employers in the aviation industry expressed hiring difficulties, specifically with respect to workers with craft skills, such as upholstery and cabinetry, which are typically gained through either technical training or community college programs. And just more of a general question, in your mind, what created this situation? It's a very difficult situation. We want to do as much as we can to solve it. So what created the situation? And of all the factors, which do you feel was the largest contributor? Ms. Lang first, please.
You know, I have to tell you, I think the data and the discussion on that's pretty mixed. And I think what is clear, though, and where there's unanimity of view, is that we've got to deal with what the demand is on that in the future and look for new pathways and strategies to change those numbers and make sure we're on course for doing it. I don't think it's a single set of solutions on that. I had the opportunity to look at the testimony of the next panel. I think they have a lot of great insight being on the front line to both what has caused some of the problems, and frankly, I'm very impressed by some of their ideas on the solutions, which we will take very seriously.
All right, we'll look forward to the second panel. Ms. Krause, have any thoughts on that issue?
No, I just think when we've looked at sort of the challenges to the supply, there's been a variety of factors that have been raised. Things like EMT grads having some highly sought after skills, so they sometimes end up in different industries. Also, we've heard about preference for getting a bachelor's degree over a technical degree. And also regional sort of issues in terms of some of the hiring challenges that they might face at rural versus urban areas and things like that. So, but that said, I think as Kate mentioned, I mean, there's a number of efforts underway by industry and others to kind of target and address some of those issues.
Okay, I think you're going to see a lot of support from this committee and this body to be supportive of those efforts. Ms. Krause, in your written testimony, you referenced the need for more complete data regarding the supply of and demand for aerospace workers. What do you think the FAA and this subcommittee should do to improve the availability of the data?
I think the Aviation Workforce Steering Committee that's being stood up provides a real opportunity to kind of look at what data already exists out there and how it might be leveraged and how we might make connections between some of that data to better understand where some of the opportunities are to better support this workforce as well as identify gaps. So I think I'd start by kind of assessing what exists.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions for today. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Stanton. Now turn to Representative Gallagher, Wisconsin, for 5 minutes.
Feels good to be up here, don't mind saying, as opposed to down there. Thank you for being here today. We really appreciate it. This may be also a question for the second panel, and so I hope I get a chance to talk about it as well. But I've heard from my local airports from Northeast Wisconsin that pay for aircraft mechanic or repair person can be quite high, but that's not necessarily reflected in job postings, especially in Wisconsin. You know, if the pay potential is indeed considerable, we would expect that demand would be higher. Maybe to GAO, in your research, can you explain the pay potential for mechanics and repair personnel and how that factors into this discussion?
I think when you look at the aviation maintenance workforce, it is a wide range of skill sets that support that workforce. You have everyone from FAA certificated mechanics, certificated repairmen, as well as non-certificated workers who are overseen by those certificated workers. When we've looked at the BLS data, the wages are wide-ranging. They range from about $37,000 to $98,000. So it is a wide range, which would be expected given the sort of wide variety of skills and experience that workforce has.
Is the primary variable that explains the range geographic, or?
I'm not sure that we've looked specifically at that, but we could follow up.
That'd be great. And how long does it take to get to higher pay grades? I mean, have you done an analysis of just sort of the evolution of careers, whether you're an aircraft mechanic or repair person, and what are the advancement opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of maybe from the education to the certification aspect, I mean, it's usually around 1 to 3 years that it takes to become a certificated mechanic, and then experience after that. I think you have the non-certificated workers that can develop work experience. I mean, I think on-the-job training is a big aspect of a lot of the maintenance workforce, so I think that there's varying channels that you can take to develop skills.
Great, thank you. And we would love to follow up with GAO on this. And then Ms. Lang, I just would ask, and I apologize if I missed this, I'm shuffling between 2 different hearings, but have you seen any success in terms of programs to transition veterans with aviation experience into the civilian aerospace industry? What programs are out there that you think are worth doubling down on that have proven success?
Well, clearly there are programs that are getting veterans from the military into the aviation community, and I think a lot of those are pretty well documented in some of the especially the GI Bill and some of the work right now with industry to recruit pilots. I mean, pilots from the military are a major source of the pilot community in the industry right now on the commercial side. But as I mentioned, there are a number of things we are doing. I mean, DOT has a program right now called Forces to Flyers that's working with different flight schools to get pilots or to get veterans that are not pilots into the aviation community as pilots. We've got the provision in the appropriations bill. Plus, we've got a number of initiatives underway with DOD and the Air Force to remove some of the barriers, streamline certification requirements for DOD mechanics to civilian mechanics. So there's actually quite a bit going on.
And then a final question for either or both of you. I mean, and again, apologies if I missed this. What apprenticeship programs that get into the classroom, K through 12 classroom, have shown success, get kids interested, not only in being pilots, but potentially being repairmen and mechanics and earning a good living that may not require them to go to a traditional 4-year college?
I just have a couple of anecdotes, and I think they're kind of the programs are early on, but there are, for example, repair stations that have started partnering with high schools to develop programs. I think you're seeing a lot of different ways that industry is trying to make connections with educational institutions to sort of build that pipeline.
I would only add, because I think we're seeing a real renaissance, certainly at the FAA, and the things we need to do with AVSED and STEM programs. And I think it's a truism to say that the closer we are in the education system to entering the workforce, the more robust the data. But I think the truism is you got to catch kids early. And if you really think about it, almost anybody in the business will tell you at what age they were inspired and got the bug for aviation. And it's really on all of us to get out there and making sure we're catching children as young as we can to get inspired and interested and with tools to enter the workforce.
Well, thank you. My time has expired, but I may never give up my seat on the top row.
Our side only controls this side, so you've picked a fight with Garrett Graves. With that, I recognize Representative Allred of Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here to our witnesses. Ms. Lang, I want to follow up on the question that's just being asked, because I read in your written testimony and was pleased to learn about the FAA's Adopt a School initiative, which was launched in DC, as well as Dallas, which I represent at the Solar Prep School for Girls at James Bonham. So I wanted to drill down a little bit on that. Can you elaborate on some of the activities the students will be participating in that program, and what are your desired outcomes for the Adopt a School initiative?
Well, the FAA, like I said, is really convinced that we've got to catch kids early. And this was actually an idea that came out of our senior leadership development program, that we actually foster a pilot program to see what we can do purposely to get out there and reach out to schools. We ended up in Dallas because one of the people in the development program was from Dallas and was very energetic to get involved in it. But I think the basic idea, and we've already started that, we're working with 4 schools in Dallas and with the teachers to create an aviation curriculum. And the idea is to use aviation concepts to amplify and apply science and math learning. And so we've started on that. In some cases, we'll be doing direct in-classroom work, but especially after talking to our colleagues on the next panel, they've really got me thinking about the things we need to do to get hands-on experience and get that muscle memory built in and those skills started at a younger age. And we've got to get people out because, aviation is actually really cool. And getting people out of the classroom and into the hangars or into the maintenance facilities or looking at what goes on in the belly of an airport is really going to give people the buzz. And that's where I think we're going to go with these programs. It's an important pilot. We're already pleased with the initial results. We will be measuring how those kids in Dallas, what they learned before they came in at midpoint and afterwards. We are going to take a good look at that. I think we have to figure out some better metrics of whether and what works. And that's what this program is going to do. I think we're already excited to see what we might be able to do in the coming year to take it from a pilot to more mainstream within our regional offices.
Well, thank you. I think that obviously aviation is extremely important for the Dallas economy, and I think that it's a great place to have these programs. I am, of course, interested in increasing the representation of women and minorities in aviation. I know we've had some discussion about that already today, but I wanted to ask specifically about the Adopt a School initiative and whether or not this would also be part of an effort to increase that representation.
Absolutely. I think it's a great point. I can't tell you specifically how the selection of these schools was done in this case. But I can assure you a major focus of the steering committee is going to be working on what we're doing nationwide to go into those school districts where we've had areas where it's been tough to recruit into the community, and that's women, it's minorities, it's people with disabilities. I hope we will have much more to report to the committee on what we've already been doing, but also some of the things we in industry and academia need to do together. And more importantly, we really need to start showing the dial move on how those numbers are changing.
Yeah. Well, I would encourage you to implement measures to study how that's impacting and whether or not there's any success there, and to report that back to us as well. Very interested in that program, and I think it has great potential. I want to thank you for doing it in Dallas. I want to go quickly to the GAO study, though, and the recommendations that were issued there, and just ask you whether or not you plan to implement those recommendations or what your plan is in terms of collecting data and improving diversity in the workforce. That's to you, Ms. Lang.
Well, again, I have to say, I read both the 2014 GAO report and then the one that was just issued last week, and it was really discouraging to see that the numbers hadn't changed. And I think someone earlier asked, how is that possible? And I think we really have to get in there and really do a forensic on why that's happening and what we have to do and come up with better strategies, because obviously what we've done isn't enough.
There are some recommendations in the study, and do you have any plans on implementing any of those, or are you in the process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the report just came out, and I think the FAA is examining all of those, but I think we're trying everything on at this stage of the game. I haven't ruled any of those out.
All right, thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, and I'll turn to Representative Balderson of Ohio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, both of you for being here today. And it's encouraging that this committee and the chairman have advocated for workforce provisions. I'm excited to learn about Administrator Dickerson's actions to foster the aviation. A lot of the questions have been asked that I think a lot of us are asking, so I'm trying not to duplicate some of the things that you've been asked. But in written testimony coming from our second panel today that I've gone over, only students 18 years or older can only gain access to work-based opportunities in our nation's airports. Have you looked at expanding this apprenticeship or internship type for high schoolers?
I have to tell you, last night when I was reading the testimony, and I actually had a chance to talk to the principal a little bit, I was surprised by that. I worked in airport operations a good part of my early career, and I really want to get behind that and see what the issues there. I don't know what it is, but I have every intention of looking at it.
It's good to hear that. And it's not only in aviation, there's some other parameters out there for other workforce also. Do you think this would help? I mean, I think you answered the question already, but do you think this would help with recruitment to get younger kids engaged in this for firsthand experience?
You know, throughout my career, I mean, getting kids on the front line and first person, not just the textbook, really does light up the eyes of kids and inspires them. So I think whatever we can do to get kids out into the aviation community and really having those opportunities, and there's so many great programs out there that do just that and have a lot of success stories for them. So yeah, I think if there are good ideas out there that we think can help, we should try them on.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Lang. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my remaining time.
Thank you very much. We've got, recognize Representative Lynch of Massachusetts for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking member for holding this hearing. Ms. Lang, I couldn't agree more with your insight in terms of getting young people involved early in the process. I know from my own experience, I took some welding classes in high school, ended up going to the Ironworkers Apprenticeship School for 3 years. Then I went to work at a shipyard. They had a welding school as well. I became president of the Ironworkers Union. Of course, then I got my law degree and I became a politician. My wife says it's been one disappointment after another. But I would say that it has a tremendous influence getting young people involved early. It just, part of it is just letting kids know what is out there. And they have an opportunity to become skilled workers, gives them some direction and some options. One of the successful programs that they've used in the building trades is the Helmets to Hard Hats program. So the building trades unions all across the country, AFL-CIO, work with the Building Trades Employers Association, and as men and women are transitioning out of active military duty, they're pulled right into the building trades. So, and we do an assessment. If they're already highly skilled enough, they'll just take them in as full journeymen and journeywomen members. And if they are in need of additional training, they'll plug them into their apprenticeship programs, sometimes as second-year or third-year apprentices because they don't need that much training. But it's been a great program for our diversity goals because you got a lot of women and people of color coming out of the military, plugged them right into our unions, so that's been helpful there. And there's also the fact that many of our sons and daughters in uniform have deployed multiple times. And there's a stress level there and a difficulty and awkwardness transitioning back to civilian life. So we find that it's been very helpful that when they come into our organizations, they're accepted, they're supported, and it's a good there's a good vibe there, and everybody's so proud of their service. I think they feel very much accepted. So is there anything like that that the FAA and aviation employers are doing and maybe the Machinists Union? I know they're very active. They have a great program. Are they doing something similar to sort of reach out to our sons and daughters in uniform. I know there's a, there's an effort ongoing when people are reaching that point of transitioning out of the military. They have it on Armed Forces television. When you're over in Afghanistan or Iraq, you see it all the time. It's constant. But is there any active program going on with the FAA to try to facilitate that?
Well, first of all, thanks for the tip on the helmets to hard hats. And I think that's definitely something I'd like to reach out to our union partners to learn a little bit more about. I mean, I think there are a number of internship programs. I think there's work we're doing with DOD. We've talked about some of that already. I'm impressed by this industry, I don't want to say is waking up, but you see a lot of innovation occurring now because there's an awareness that we actually have to do things that are creating pathways much earlier in people's careers and getting them hooked in.
Yeah.
So I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so, Ms. Kraus, how much of this mismatch or the gap that we're seeing on the aviation mechanics side and technician side is a result of competition with some of the other disciplines? Because we've got, kids that have any type of acumen in engineering have so many choices now, right? Computer science, bioscience, chemical engineering, all of that. How much is that, some of these, maybe they're higher paying or more promising disciplines are pulling people away from the aviation industry?
I think it's an issue that's difficult to quantify, but definitely something we've heard from stakeholders as we spoke with them. They've talked about AMT schools, students in those schools having a highly sought-after skill set in other occupations that do have, can have better wages or better working conditions. So things like amusement parks, NASCAR, industrial heating. So those are other areas that they, might pursue. So that.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I want to turn now to the gentleman from Minnesota, Representative Stauber, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. I appreciate both your testimonies here today. Ms. Lang, in 2016, a report done by Boeing showed more than 40% of the current pilots flying for major airlines will meet retirement age by 2026. Can you please discuss what the FAA is doing to address this projected pilot shortage?
We're very aware that industry has a great deal of concerns about the pilot pipeline. And clearly, on the one hand, it's good news because we have robust forecasts for growth in aviation, both in terms of traffic levels and in the fleet. But we are also aware that we've got to get our arms around what are potential impediments. We've got to get people attracted to aviation, but I think my colleague from GAO put it well. In light of the costs associated with entry, especially on the pilot side, the more we have programs that give them confidence that they're going to get a rate of return on that investment, probably the better we're going to do. And a good portion of the work that our steering committee is going to do is, first of all, look at what we can do with other sister government agencies to create better access and affordability on education, making this career path more affordable, and the access to loans and so forth is something very important we have to do. We have to look at what we can do on a regulatory end. But most importantly, I think we have got to collectively come together as an industry to look at what we all have to do in our respective roles to really feed that pipeline and get people interested in it. And take the long view. I mean, I think we have to start not just at the workforce we need today, but also the workforce we need 10 years from now and 20 years from now. What is our level of investment in making sure we're priming that pump?
And a couple follow-ups. In the current age for commercial pilots as retirement is 65, and that was changed in 2009 from 60 years old. Is raising the mandatory retirement age, which hasn't been raised in 11 years, part of the discussion at the FAA?
Well, I will tell you truthfully, that's a bit out of my swim lane. But that said, because I've never minded my swim lanes too well, I would offer this. On the one hand, there are an awful lot of ideas about the things we can do as a regulator that could do things to get up to date on the capabilities of modern science, medical information, technology, all of which will safely allow us to think in different ways than we have in the past. I have not had a conversation with at FAA with anybody on it. I am aware that different parts of the world have raised the age limit to 67. I think those are worth looking at and examining, both the safety case, the medical case they made in doing that. I'm old enough to have been around when the debate began on moving from age 60. It took a lot of rigor, and it took a lot to build public confidence that we can do that safely. And I think that's one of the things that will at least be on the list of things to examine and explore what are some of the practices in other parts of the world.
Thank you. Just a comment, you had talked a couple of minutes ago about the importance of ensuring that the aviation is front and center. What are you doing for the high schools and even in the colleges to promote and working with other governmental agencies to promote aviation and to promote the industry in general? You know, we see the high schools bring the building and construction trades in, for example. What is the aviation doing, and what do you see the push for the industry to move forward?
You know, again, I think there's an awful lot we need to do. On the one hand, I'll be perfectly honest, as I mentioned before, much earlier in my career, FAA had a very robust program in the field on STEM and AVSED, where we're working with all ages, and I mean from kindergarten all the way to postgraduate work. We have some activities we've kept doing, but we really are in the process of rebuilding that program up. I don't know how it began to atrophy in certain parts of the agency, but frankly, we do have to build it up again. I also think that we really need to listen with the long ear to our aviation academic counterparts on what it is they need us to be doing to improve their ability to get more people into the pipeline.
Thank you very much, and my time's expired. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, and now recognize Representative Garcia of Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here this morning, our two panelists. I'd like to begin with Ms. Lang. Last year, Congressman Hank Johnson and I made an effort to increase funding in the FAA's Minority Serving Institutions intern program. And although minorities make up 40% of the U.S. population, 75% of aerospace engineers are white. I, of course, hail from a predominantly Latino district. According to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, only 7.8% of the FAA's workforce is Latino, though we make up about 16.8% of the total workforce. These disparities are exactly the issues programs like the Minority Serving Institutions intern program at the FAA seek to resolve, as you know. Can you share with me what strategies the FAA currently employs to diversify its workforce, and do you think that these initiatives are adequate? And finally, should the FAA do further to ensure its workforce is reflective of the broader U.S. population?
You know, clearly we need to do more, and because the numbers don't lie. And so I do think we're going to have to work on whether examining the programs we do have, and we do have some. We do have programs with our employee associations. We have programs with minority serving institutions where we have internships. I think last year we did about 150. And we worked in close partnership with Hispanic and Black universities on those programs. But the numbers aren't changing as rapidly as they ought to. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to chair my first steering committee meeting, and I think we collectively agreed we are going to have to do a more focused effort, both within the FAA and with industry, in improving these numbers.
Any sense what that could be? Any sense what that could be? Measures to improve outcomes?
Well, I mean, I think fundamentally the measure is increasing the employment numbers. And I think we have to absolutely understand where are the barriers in recruiting and getting people interested in going into the aviation careers. I'm very interested in hearing the next panel We've got institutions that are based and working very closely in minority neighborhoods in recruiting. I think we have to learn from these programs and adopt the best practices that are out there, but we definitely can do more. I think our own outreach efforts have to do more in these communities.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Cross, in 2015, the FAA issued a proposed rule to modernize the aviation maintenance technician educational curriculum. I understand that there have been growing concerns about the aging curriculum, which is exacerbating a skills gap in the workforce, coupled with a retiring workforce. This is cause for concern. Would you agree that a modernization of AMT curricula is overdue?
Yeah, we would absolutely agree that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. When we've talked to stakeholders about sort of the implications of the outdated curriculum, some of the factors they cite is really kind of having to focus on both new and old technologies. Companies talk about having to provide gap training in terms of filling in some of those skill sets. So we do think this is an important area to address.
And would you also agree that while modernization of the AMT curriculum and maintaining minimum safety standards must remain a top priority?
Given the mission of FAA, safety is very important.
So what steps is the industry or the FAA taking to advance its 2015 rulemaking or other initiatives to address the aging curriculum for AMT certification, for either one of you?
Well, I can say that we definitely have got to get this thing done, and there's unanimity of view that it is late and overdue. The FAA did a rulemaking that we began, I believe, in 2015. The ideas came in. There were new ideas we hadn't complicated that put us back into doing a supplemental rulemaking last year. Our goal is to get that out, and we understand the interest of this community and this committee that get done quickly.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. Recognize Representative Woodall, Georgia, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all both for being here. I was interested in the GAO report, not the one that you wrote, Ms. Krause, but the one that was written in 2003 that said the very same thing that the one you wrote said. And so my question is for you, Ms. Lang. A lot of excitement about your arrival in this spot at this time. I look forward to having the conversation with the next panel. But I'm wondering if FAA does have a continuing and growing role in aviation maintenance certification, or if that role needs to turn and begin to decline. We've got Delta folks coming up next. They've been innovating a lot over the last 60 years. Gulfstream folks coming up next. They've been innovating a lot over the last 60 years. We can't get new regs out for our maintenance technicians in the last 60 years. That doesn't tell me that you need to hurry up and get these things out so we can have them in place for the next 60 years. It tells me that maybe Gulfstream has a better shot at identifying the right skill sets for its mechanics than you do, as talented as you are. As you look forward, since you don't mind getting out of your swim lane, do you see a continuing and growing role of FAA certification, or do you see a possibility that maybe you're working more on hooking up with high schools and developing minority interest and working on STEM programs in colleges, but that Gulfstream can determine for Gulfstream what it needs, and Delta can make sure it's partnering with good partners to get Delta what it needs?
Well, I think the first answer is we've got to do our job. I mean, look, the FAA puts high priority in the rulemaking process on safety critical rulemakings and procedures.
But if I could just interrupt you for a second, that just can't possibly be true, right? 60 years of delay can't be high priority. GAO recommending that changes happen in 2003 can't be high priority. It's not your fault, right? It's different administrations, it's different parties, but it's not high priority. It may well be the lowest priority. The minority retention programs, we've set those up. The STEM development programs, we've set those up. The changing safety training maintenance requirements, we are not doing anything at all.
What can I say but point taken? I think the FAA needs to get the lead out and get this rule done. I mean, it is a rule everyone agrees is out of date. So first and foremost, we've got to do our part in getting that rule out, and we are committed to getting that done. I think you raise an interesting question, again, on this swim lane issue, is to ultimately what is the regulatory role for the FAA going forward in curriculum development if we can't find a way to do it with agility and real-time adaptability. And that's what I'm hearing. You know, it raises a lot of questions that I think we need to have follow-up conversations with this committee on, because these are really important safety questions. There are a lot of industries that not only do the certification, by that I mean the testing and practical exams, but they also establish the curriculum as a precondition to doing that. Now, you see that on the finance sector, and I think we all would have to answer the mail on why we would have a lesser standard and get out of the curriculum business on the safety side. But that said, we have to do it in a way that remains current or it's not useful. So first order of business is getting out the rulemaking we have in hand, and we are committed to doing that. But I think there's a longer conversation to have about what we need in order to stay agile and adaptable to a very fast-changing pace in technology.
Ms. Krause, as I mentioned, folks are excited about Ms. Lang being in this job, and if anybody can get it done, she can. I'll ask the other stakeholders when they come in panel two, but the stakeholders you talk to, is it obvious to everyone that the FAA has a continued role in curriculum training standards? And I don't mean a role in guidance and making recommendations. I mean a role that says, do it this way, or your folks can't graduate, so keep building those paper airplanes so that your kids can be trained for the 21st century.
I think there are different approaches to take to addressing curriculum. I think the thing we would emphasize is the need to involve FAA to partner with industry and the Congress on how best to pursue that. I mean, we didn't talk with stakeholders on getting perspectives on that specific issue, but that should certainly be part of these conversations on how best to move forward.
The FAA's got a lot on its plate, and a lot of constructive criticism comes from every direction. I just, as much as you care, you can't possibly care more about Gulfstream safety than Gulfstream does. And so I'm just looking for those ways that we can alleviate some of your burden while continuing to maintain that safety for the flying public. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Absolutely. Recognize Representative Perry of Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank the witnesses. Thank the chairman for the time. I am late to the conversation. I do apologize. Multiple hearings at the same time, and if the question has already been asked, I apologize for that as well. What is the projected release date if you have one of the final rule? And again, I apologize. I hope it's been asked, but if you can characterize that at all, and I probably don't have to go into different machinations about how we got to where we are and being late and so on and so forth, but what do you see?
Well, I know by the FAA's internal standards we hold ourselves to, we try to get, if we've done a supplemental, and we did that in June of last year, the goal is to get the final rule out within 16 months, which would be this fall.
This fall? Yes. And just, I hate to do this, but can you characterize, there's a lot of folks that are waiting, right? There's a lot of folks that are waiting, and they're trying to plan. So what does fall start on August 30th or September 1st, or when does fall start for the FAA?
I think 16 months from June is October, if my math serves me.
Okay. So we're looking for that in October.
But listen, we understand there's a lot of interest in if we can, knock on wood, we'll make it, but hopefully we'll beat it. And I'll take that message home clearly.
So just out of curiosity, I've been honored to work around a lot of mechanics, A&P folks in my career, but I've never been one, so you just assume they know what they need to do, and all the ones that I have been around did know what they needed to know and kept the aircraft safe and kept us safe. That having been said, what is the collaboration between the FAA and industry regarding the needs that are commensurate with the industry today, but it also includes the industry of the past, I'm hoping we're not spending a lot of time teaching people how to dope a wing, but at the same time, those things are still out there, and you have to have some some perspective on it. On the other hand, we're getting into hypersonic flight and unmanned use and all that kind of thing. So what kind of collaboration does the FAA do with industry and curriculum development?
Well, some of it is done formally. I mean, obviously, the 147 process on the curriculum is a formal process, but it's clear we need to get current in making sure that, because we've got all kinds of new avionics that are out there, new composites, that we've got to get people, the curriculum, training people to the things that are out there toward a more performance-based as opposed to a prescriptive way of doing business, which is what the industry is doing. I think first and foremost, we have to look internally at what our role is as a regulator and the things we're doing that we have to correct. So 147 is a good example of that, but I suspect there are other things, and we have to look at our regulatory responsibilities on that. I think a big part of my job in the next few months is really, though, beginning a robust conversation with industry and academia on what it is we collectively need to do to improve that pipeline. And that, I will tell you truthfully, I just started this job in January. I've read an awful lot of materials in the last 4 or 5 weeks, but I'm really looking forward to beginning the conversation. Today's hearing is a great opportunity on that. I'm very much looking forward to the next panel, but it is one of those things where the sooner I can get out of Washington and get on the front line, probably the better. Nothing personal on that.
Well, we sure appreciate your involvement and your short tenure so far. We don't mean to be critical. We hope it is constructive, but there are concerns that are legitimate, and not only the flying public, but the industry demands timeliness and our focus and attention on this issue, as I know you bring it. And so please don't take the criticism as solely criticism, but you can see, and you probably already know, that some of these things are warranted because they're concerning the continual delays vex us and the people that we answer to, our bosses. So we sure appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Perry. I think that's all the questions that we have for the panel. I want to thank the panel, first panel, for coming this morning to answer our questions. I imagine we will have follow-up questions on individual issues. And with that, we'll let staff reset the table and get the second panel ready to go. Great. Well, let's get started with panel 2. I want to welcome our next panel of witnesses. In order is Mr. Steve Jackson, who'll be the principal of Aviation High School, and he's accompanied by Mr. Mario Catamaccio. Is that close enough? Or exactly, great. Assistant principal at Aviation High School. Apparently no one's there providing discipline today. Ms. Sharon, is it DeVivo? DeVivo, president of Vaughn College. Mr. Joseph McDermott, vice president of Law and Public Affairs managing director of technical operations of Delta Airlines. Mr. Jay Neely, vice president of Law and Public Affairs, Gulfstream Aerospace, and Ms. Dana Donati, is that right? Great. General manager and director of academic programs at Lift Academy. Thank you all for being here today. We look forward to your testimony. And without objection, our witnesses' full statements will be included in the record. As with the previous panel, since your witness testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee requests you limit oral testimony to 5 minutes. We'll now proceed with witness testimonies and first recognize Mr. Jackson for 5 minutes. You're recognized.
Chairman Larson, Ranking Member Graves, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for calling this important hearing on the future of our nation's aviation maintenance and manufacturing workforce. On behalf of the students, staff, and graduates of Aviation High School, I'm very honored to testify before this subcommittee. I am the principal of Aviation High School, a public high school that has been training aviation maintenance technicians since 1936. It is located in Queens, New York, the most diverse county in the nation, and our school mirrors that diversity, and we have 21% female student body. And we are in reach of JFK International, LaGuardia, and Newark Liberty International airports, the Northeast aviation sector. The overwhelming majority of technicians at these airports were trained by Aviation High School and our fellow panelists, Vaughn College. There are approximately 20,000 students currently enrolled in Part 147 aviation maintenance technical schools in the United States, and Aviation High School educates 1 out of every 10 of those students. We enroll more students than in any other single aviation program. We are part of a larger community, of course, of 176 certified schools by the FAA across the United States, and nearly all the other aviation maintenance schools are colleges and technical schools. While our graduates are eligible to earn their airframe and power plant technician licenses at a much younger age. Our students pull double duty, therefore, to obtain both their high school credentials with academic, arts, language, and physical education courses like any other school, and they also, of course, have the rigorous aviation maintenance training of a Part 147 school that is typically, again, taught at the college or post-high school level. But as this subcommittee has identified, and we heard from the first panel, we have a problem. As a community, aviation maintenance technical schools have the capacity to enroll 35,000 students, and Part 147 schools currently fill just over half of those seats. Our growing industry will need 193,000 new technicians over the next 10 years in North America alone. As a high school that receives over 4,000 applications for an incoming class of 500 students, we have a few thoughts on how to address this shortage. At Aviation High School, we see that exposure to the world of aviation at a younger age is key, much younger than where our high school program actually begins. Fewer and fewer students are exposed to mechanical work. They do not work on their bikes or tinker with their cars, with their families. Our goods are becoming more digital, and when they break, they're more easily replaced than repaired. The current STEM models in education provide the math and science coursework for our elementary and middle school students, but these courses also need to provide students with more hands-on practical jobs so that they can figure out at a younger age whether they would like to learn how systems work together or how they can be fixed and improved by using their hands. As a school community, we also debate the idea that technicians, who were once known as mechanics, would be better represented and marketed as a career if they were to be known as aircraft engineers. By rebranding aircraft maintenance and repairs an official engineering career path, we believe that many more young people would set their sights on entering the aviation maintenance field as aircraft engineers. For us, one of the most important aspects, in addition to what I'm stating, of our program is the close relationship that we have with commercial airlines that operate in the New York City area. Aviation High School has official partnerships with fellow panelists Delta Airlines, as well as JetBlue Airways, British Airways, and Panasonic Avionics, which provide many of our students with internship work-based learning opportunities at their hangars and maintenance facilities. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey has provided us with classroom and ramp space at JFK International Airport, where our students work in their classroom, participate in internships after class, and that also complete their coursework on a Boeing 727 that FedEx donated to us. Adding more opportunities for our students to participate in such real-world on-airport experiences at a young age would help to improve their training and entice more young students to enter the career path. We would also benefit from the introduction of more flexibility and modernization of curriculum, as we heard this morning, for schools to address the FAA Part 147 regulations that would help them align their coursework to the needs of the industry and the geographic location of each school. To that point, we support the Promoting Aviation Regulations for Technical Training, Part 147, HR 5427 bill, the Mechanic Aircraft Certification Standards, and the removal of CTEM requirements that ATEC has submitted for review to the subcommittee. Timelines suggest we will not see a modernized rule until at least 2022. Therefore, we ask Congress to support HR 5427, which would give our schools like ours the flexibility to educate our students and prepare them for today's high-tech jobs in aviation. As one can imagine, maintaining and operating a Part 147 school that works to create a real-world experience for our students as high school students also creates a heavy price tag for our local educational system to fund. We would be very appreciative that we are very appreciative that Congress has allocated federal funds to support aviation maintenance schools. It would be extremely helpful if Part 147 schools receive the additional allocations as soon as possible so that we can continue to improve our students' technical training for the 21st century workforce. We appreciate this subcommittee's interest in the future of aviation and a desire to address the technician shortage. Our belief is that the future is built on programs like Aviation High School and Vaughn College, on quality, well-rounded education that exposes young students to STEM and mechanical training at earlier ages, and practical hands-on partnerships and connections with the FAA and the aviation industry. Thank you very much for this opportunity to testify today on behalf of Aviation High School, and we look forward to your follow-up questions to address specific ways that Congress can respond to the aviation maintenance technician shortage. And we also brought a wing section with flight controls for our questions and answers, so you can see some examples of what we're talking about.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to Dr. Sharon DeVivo, president of Vaughn College.
Good morning, Chairman Larson, Ranking Member Graves, ladies and gentlemen of the Subcommittee on Aviation. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak to this esteemed group. And I'm honored to be part of this panel of engaged leaders who are working to provide incredible opportunities to tomorrow's aviation leaders. Vaughn College is also located in New York City, directly across the street from LaGuardia Airport. Founded in '32, we offer master's, bachelor's, associates, and certificate programs in all aspects of aviation, including flight, aviation maintenance, air traffic control, flight dispatch, as well as engineering, airport airline management, and other technologies. We serve a population of about 1,650 students. 650 of those are in aviation maintenance, 300 in flight and airport airline management, and about 300 in engineering. 80% of our students are from a minority background. We really reflect the diversity that is Queens, and most are first-generation Americans and first-generation college students. We are also designated as a Hispanic serving institution. 12% are women, and we're working to raise our female representation. We also have more than 150 veterans. As has already been discussed, we face an unprecedented need for pilots and maintenance technicians for the next 20 years, according to the Boeing and Airbus forecasts. Right now, the United States will not produce enough qualified talent to meet the demand, which is why we must expand the existing pipeline to include opportunities for underserved populations, especially minorities and women who have not been exposed to these fields. Prospective students want to know that aviation is a high-tech, in-demand field with well-paying jobs and a solid career outlook. The average family income for a Vaughn student is about $39,000, and within 1 year graduation, 99% of those are employed or continuing their education, 83% in their field. For those graduates who pursue an aviation maintenance degree or certification, those skills are also transferable to a variety of fields, including transportation, public utilities, and manufacturing. In 2017, a study done by the Equality of Opportunity Project, published in the New York Times, looked at more than 2,100 institutions in the nation, and those that were the best at moving students from the bottom percentages in income to the top. And Vaughn was #1 in the country. That is the evidence of the transformation possible with a Vaughn education. And we don't just change that student's life, we change that whole family's trajectory. As a result of this overwhelming evidence, we made a strategic decision to offer our full-time Bachelor of Science and Associate in Aviation Maintenance students the Vaughn Guarantee. If they remain enrolled full-time during their studies, meet regularly with our Career Services Office, and are not employed within 1 year, we will pay their federal loans for 1 year. Our students and families are primarily concerned with affordability and the assurance of a career path, and this guarantee is a declaration that Vaughn considers this a true partnership for student success. Queens is incredibly fortunate to have an aviation ecosystem that could act as a model for other major metropolitan areas. That ecosystem includes education partners like Aviation High School, who we support with Bridge to College programs, partnering on women in aviation events, scholarships, and more. Between these two institutions, we're one of the largest producers of technicians to the industry. Our other outstanding partners include the FAA, who we work closely with to produce high-quality professional maintenance technicians. We also work with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, Delta, Endeavor, Republic, JetBlue, United, and the Cradle of Aviation Museum, among others, to provide a clear career pathway. In order to expand the pipeline, we must create greater awareness at the middle and elementary school levels. Waiting till high school is simply too late, and we need to emphasize math and science confidence and sticking with these subjects, especially for girls who after 8th grade are less likely to take technical courses. At Vaughn, we regularly host the scouting community with interactive workshops, are developing a program with a local middle school that will also include a partnership with a high school. Our students do demonstrations just last week, the Tiny Whoop Fest, using UAVs at the Cradle of Aviation. And we host awareness events in cooperation with JetBlue and the New York Hall of Science, as well as send Vaughn students to participate in a variety of secondary school events. These programs help to create the early awareness that is needed to draw individuals who are traditionally not well represented in the industry. More could be done with support for programs such as grants for simulation equipment, curriculum development, and funding for the education coordination at the FAA's regional offices, which Ms. Lang discussed as they're in the rebuilding process. Once we create awareness and students decide that aviation is a field they want to pursue, we have to find a way to make it affordable. The average debt load for a student pursuing aviation maintenance is about $17,500, and for a pilot student, they're adding $60,000 to $70,000 on top of the cost of tuition. Many of our families do not qualify for a PLUS loan because of their credit scores of lack of credit, and they have to turn to the alternative loan market where the interest rates are much higher. Congress could consider increasing the maximum Pell Award from $61.95 annually and modify the standard academic progress rules, which do not allow students to take more than 4 consecutive semesters. By lowering the overall debt load for the neediest students, you provide a lifetime career path with incredible opportunities. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to, sorry, I need my glasses, which I lost. Mr. McDermott, Delta. Or I'll turn to Brian, who's still here. For 5 minutes, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Larson and Ranking Member Graves, for the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm Joe McDermott, a Managing Director in the Technical Operations Division at Delta Airlines, or Tech Ops. I am responsible primarily for the strategy surrounding recruitment, training, and cabin maintenance. I've spent my entire civilian career at Delta Tech Ops, having joined the company in 1991 after leaving the Air Force. As the largest aviation maintenance repair and overhaul group in North America, we employ more than 10,000 highly skilled technicians, engineers, and other support employees. Together, we provide maintenance to more than 875 Delta aircraft and more than 150 other airline, military, and government customers. The dedication, skill, and hard work of our employees drives Delta's industry-leading operational reliability. Delta Tech Ops employees truly are the best in the business. My nearly 30-year tenure at Delta is not unique to me. Our people are proud and passionate about what they do and the company they work for. This is the result of a strong Delta culture grounded in belief that our employees are at the core of our success. Delta's maintenance workforce receives industry-leading total compensation and benefits. Within 7.5 years at Delta, a mechanic can make an average base salary of more than $100,000 a year, and this compensation does not include Delta's robust profit-sharing program. This Friday, our profit-sharing program will pay out $1.6 billion to our employees, about 2 months of an additional salary per employee. And for each of the past 6 years, we have returned more than $1 billion in profit-sharing to our deserving workforce. Our culture, commitment to employees, and of course, compensation all contribute to a workforce with long tenured careers. And while that loyalty results in a highly skilled and experienced team, it also deepens the workforce challenge faced by the entire industry. More than 50% of our skilled workforce will be eligible to retire this year. To address this challenge, Delta Tech Ops launched a comprehensive pipeline strategy, a multi-pronged recruitment and professional development effort. The strategy is an end-to-end approach focused on leveraging our key partnerships for recruiting, building technical proficiency, and creating internal advancement opportunities. Perhaps the most robust element of the strategy is our AMT School Partnership Program. Delta partners with 50 schools across the country, including schools represented by other witnesses here today. Through these partnerships, Delta provides support for the school's curriculum, including training opportunities for instructors, and gives students access to internal Delta training and job shadowing opportunity. Delta also donates serviceable parts, engines, and airframes to schools for real-world maintenance experience. Delta Tech Ops also works closely with our regional airline partners, a natural connection given our interlocking workforce needs. Rather than competing for talent, we collaborate to improve AMT schools, enhance recruiting opportunities, and establish a progressive employment flow between the organizations. We are extremely proud of our veteran workforce at Delta. Veterans comprise 20% of the Tech Ops population, and the military is a key part of our recruitment strategy. The Military Potential Employee Program provides job training and hands-on experience as well as mentorships for service members within the final 180 days of their enlistment. And we are pleased to share, after months of hard work and rigorous application process, Delta has been accepted as the only commercial carrier in the Department of Defense Skill Bridge program. As part of this unique effort, service members continue to be paid by the military while Delta provides housing and on-the-job training. Both the MPE and the Skill Bridge are a win-win. Service members have an easier transition to the civilian sector with rewarding, high-paying careers, while Delta recruits hard-to-find skill sets directly from the military. To meet our future workforce needs, however, we need a steady supply of newly certified mechanics. Unfortunately, the perceived stigma associated with technical education deters young people from pursuing skill-based training. Building interest in careers in aviation maintenance at an earlier age is key to developing a large pool of skilled applicants in the future. The Tech Ops Outreach Program seeks to address this by offering high school students the ability to interact with AMT role models, as well as an opportunity for hands-on practice with tools and aircraft parts. The workforce challenges ahead, however, can't be solved by the airlines alone. We are proud to advocate for changes at the federal and state level to expand access to skills and training needed to meet tomorrow's demand. The FAA must implement provisions from the 2018 reauthorization bill to modernize AMT training regulations. The current regulations were put into place decades ago and are woefully out of date. Thank you again for holding this important hearing, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to Mr. Neely from Gulfstream. We recognize for 5 minutes.
Chairman Larson, Ranking Member Graves, on behalf of the 17,000 women and men of Gulfstream, thank you for having me here. The issues that we're dealing with here today are critically important and timely. Earlier testimony has made that abundantly clear. It's important to aviation companies like Gulfstream, like Delta and others, but quite frankly, it's most important to the young people in this country whose skill sets are not being fully realized, who don't understand the opportunities that they have in front of them. As context for my remarks, I'd like to quickly outline Gulfstream's two different but very interrelated businesses. First, quite obviously, we build business jets. Secondly, in what we call our customer support business, we provide maintenance, repair, and overhaul services for our customers' aircraft, nearly 3,000 in service. Of Gulfstream's 17,000 employees, it's important to note that roughly 4,000 of those employees are in our customer support or MRO business, key part of our business. We have 10 facilities across the country in 9 different states. Finally, from a balance of trade standpoint, I'd like to very much emphasize that roughly 50% of Gulfstream sales are international. The way I like to think about that is 50% of the salaries of everybody working on airplanes at Gulfstream is paid by somebody outside the United States. We're very proud of that. The central theme to Gulfstream's workforce development strategy is proactive engagement from K through 12, and forward, but particularly from the middle school and onwards. It's absolutely important to understand that the point underpinning our strategy is that our younger generations need help understanding what great opportunities are available in the aviation industry. We have not done our kids a good service in the way we have, quite frankly, de-emphasized the role and importance and career opportunities and the technical skills, and particularly in aviation. So our strategies, you'll hear, focuses very much on engaging students early on, educating them into the opportunities, helping them build the skill sets that enable them to enter these career paths, and quite frankly, making sure that it's not just the students, but it's the teachers and the parents as well. Because if we don't reach the teachers and parents, they will not encourage the kids to head in the right direction. Our strategy is best illustrated by running through a few examples, examples that I think you'll find instructive and that have been successful. We have a lot of work to do, don't get me wrong, but they have been successful. First, in the middle school, I mentioned that although we engage with students earlier, we really do a full court press, so to speak, starting with middle school students. That includes multiple STEM programs, aviation-specific awareness programs, and among other things, annually we tour over 1,000 middle school students through Gulfstream facilities to let them see up close and personal exactly what our facilities look like. We have youth apprenticeship programs that are high school apprenticeship programs in California, Georgia, Texas, Wisconsin, working in over 40 different 40 different jobs, from aircraft assembly, cabinet shop, quality control, aircraft maintenance operations, and the like. They're paid between $10 and $13 an hour, depending on location, at work 15 to 25 hours per week. Another example that highlights the point made earlier of the importance of industry working with school systems and others. And it's an aviation pathway program that Gulfstream has sponsored in Savannah. It's a program sponsored at a predominantly minority school. We've done it in partnership with the local school system and Savannah Technical College, obviously the local technical college. This 4-year program, again, is an aviation pathway, so students that will enter this is somewhat analogous to a major if you were in college. You enter this program, and here's how it works. The first 2 years, 8th and 9th grade, you're doing your work in the classroom, in the labs as high school students in your own high school, taking high school classes. In 11th and 12th grades, you remain on campus. You're still working in the same labs, but your teachers, your professors are from the technical college. So during those years, you're getting both high school credits and technical college credits. Students come out of this program with obviously a high school diploma, but also one or more technical certificates, depending on which sub-pathway they chose, that enable them, give them the skill sets they need to walk right out of the high school into my friend Mr. McDermott's shop or Gulfstream shop or any others in the industry. On the technical college front, we have relationships with 21 different technical colleges across the U.S. Those partnerships include, quite obviously, A&P, structural mechanic, upholstery, aviation cabinet making, non-destructive testing, so on and so forth. How do we support those technical schools? On a number of fronts. Like our friends at Delta, we're on advisory boards. We support with funding, cash money funding. We support with equipment, including giving a Gulfstream airplane to one of the technical schools for them to work. Granted, it was one that was at the end of its useful life. But we partner with those schools to ensure that their curricula are aligned with what our modern needs are, and back to that modern needs. 2 last points. One, what we call a consortium event that we held last year. That consortium event, we brought 20 representatives from technical schools across the country to Gulfstream to spend 2 days in a workshop working with us, seeing what, boots on the ground, seeing what our experience is really like for their students and getting feedback. Last but not least, on the military front, we also hire very heavily out of the military. Very, very strong skill sets coming out of the military. 25% of Gulfstream's employees are veterans. And our flight operations group, 90% of our test pilots are veterans, and 75% of our other pilots in our flight operations are veterans. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And finally, I want to call upon Dana Donati, General Manager and Director of Academic Programs at Lift Academy. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Larson, Ranking Member Graves, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Dana Donati, General Manager and Director of Academic Programs at Lift Academy, a Republic Airways company. In addition to leading Lift Academy, I've spent 11 years as a Republic Airways pilot, type-rated on both the de Havilland Dash 8 Q400 and the Embraer 175. In addition, I've held positions as an Assistant Chief Pilot and Dean of Aviation at the Community College. Thank you for the opportunity to share my perspective today. LIFT is a flight school and technician apprenticeship program focused on addressing the pilot and technician shortage while ensuring technicians and pilots who enter the aviation workforce at Republic have the appropriate skills and training needed for success. Republic launched LIFT in September 2018. Since then, we've received over 4,000 applications and secured over 500 student enrollment dates, with 281 flight students enrolled today. In 2019, the Department of Labor approved 2 LIFT Academy apprenticeship programs, the Aviation Maintenance Technician Apprenticeship Program and the Airline Transport Pilot Apprenticeship Program. Each provides apprentices with a high-quality career pathway using the Earn and Learn model. Republic Airways is a large regional airline that partners with United, American, and Delta. Like other airlines, Republic has had to overcome pilot and technician workforce challenges that threaten our ability to continue to serve these communities. While Republic is fully staffed today, upcoming retirements are expected to strain supply. About half of today's qualified pilots will reach mandatory retirement age within 15 years. In addition, ATEC projects 30% of today's technician workforce is approaching retirement. Republic Airways invested in pilot and technician training through LIFT Academy, supporting pilots from first flight to attaining 1,500 hours. Our mission at LIFT is to attract a new generation of aviators to flight by providing superior flight training while addressing the economic and structural barriers to entry. The barriers I will highlight are outreach and awareness, cost of training, technology, and training behaviors. We know that outreach is crucial for strengthening and diversifying the aviation workforce. At LIFT, we have built outreach programs through partnerships and actions designed to attract and support pilots and technicians. LIFT is also targeting underrepresented demographics through outreach. We want to improve enrollment from a diverse base of candidates and have taken steps to do so, which I have discussed in my written testimony. To help attract candidates to LIFT's maintenance apprenticeship program, we partner with Indiana high schools and career technology centers, introducing them to industry-recognized certification. Pilot career path inaccessibility has undercut the effectiveness of these outreach programs. Pilot education and training costs associated with flight education degrees at institutions of higher ed exceed federal student loan caps. To bridge the gap, students or parents must apply for personal loans. LIFT has been working to address this, providing tuition subsidy, loan assistance, and a guaranteed job, making LIFT Academy one of the most affordable and accessible pilot training programs in the nation. Technology advancements in today's commercial aircraft require both pilots and technicians to learn additional technical skills to manage automation. Technician apprentices begin their 30-month apprenticeship working on the most advanced equipment general aviation has to offer. With hands-on and classroom training, LIFT's technician apprentices are surrounded in a high-tech training environment. Classroom training for both pilots and technician apprentices incorporate the best practices of the airline by using documentation that replicates the airline's materials. Simulator training allows for actual systems failure and weather-induced scenario flying, promoting excellent safety practices and industry competencies. By removing barriers to flight training through industry-recognized apprenticeship programs, LIFT is helping Republic develop their future workforce. We also have recommendations for policymakers to empower programs like LIFT to do more to strengthen tomorrow's workforce. Expanding Title IV federal financial aid program will ensure students can finance flight training costs associated with flight education degrees. Next, Congress can encourage the FAA to update Part 147 curriculum so that mechanics are prepared to work on technologically advanced commercial aircraft. And lastly, there are too few structured training pathways to meet the demand for training airline pilots, which may force pilots to accumulate flight time on their own or deter them for the career path altogether. Chairman Larson, Ranking Member Graves, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for making workforce development a priority. It is our privilege to testify today, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to member questions, and I'll start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. I'm going to just maybe randomly pick just one. It'll be Mr. McDermott. On the Part 147 mechanics curriculum, how ready are you, and maybe you could talk to the industry, if not, I'll call on others, to flip the switch on that curriculum? If the FAA were to come out today with a rule, we've heard it maybe later this fall, if they were to come out with a rule, how quickly could you flip the switch on the curriculum? The trained people, the equipment to support that curriculum and so on. Get that microphone.
From a Delta perspective, we're absolutely ready to go. In our partnerships and having the discussions with all the schools, we're making it very clear that once the curriculum has been updated, we will find ways to be able to assist them in many, many ways we've already been doing. It's too important to the industry to be able to get that modified curriculum, specifically in avionics as well as composites. We've done some payments out of our foundation to different schools to start building on that today. We're not going to wait, but certainly as this progresses, we'll be ready to go.
Ms. Donati, could you discuss that question as well from an educator's perspective, and I'll go back to Aviation High School on this question as well. How quickly could you flip the switch to an updated curriculum?
Well, for Lift Academy, it's a little different because we're an apprenticeship program. So our entire fleet at Lift is composite because we're training what Republic Airways needs, which is technicians to work on composite aircraft. We are meeting the requirements of Part 147 through, different teaching models to teach dope and fabric. But those students, other than learning it in the classroom, they're not really experiencing it. So as far as, how quickly we can adjust to new curriculum, it can happen overnight at Lift Academy.
Mr. Jackson, could you respond to that question?
Sure, and I want to first thank you for having two of us represent the school. So it's a great question because as a New York City public high school, as I mentioned in my statement, we have a lot of regulations, not just FAA, but New York City and state requirements to follow. Right. So it's definitely a challenge for us. And Mr. Caramaggio oversees the aviation maintenance program, so I'd like him to address that aspect of it.
Good morning, thank you. I know we've been speaking very clearly today on the modernization of curriculum, and the words composites and avionics come to mind. Avionics and composites, as it addresses a 147 school, becomes a difficult challenge. Just in budget alone, it would seriously affect our school budget to support such technology. However, we at Aviation High School are working very closely in collaboration with our local FSDO, with Delta Airlines, thank you Delta, and with JetBlue to move in that direction. I have with me here today a project that was designed locally at our school in collaboration with the parties mentioned, where we do just that. We have taken an old design, going back to Ms. Donati's testimony concerning wood and fabric. This wing bay, and we call this a wing bay, and this is a section of an aircraft wing with the associated aileron or flight control, for many years at Aviation High School was constructed out of wood, dope, and fabric. We have moved to composites, where we now have our youngsters incorporate advanced sheet metal and composite technology, where we actually do the repairs that our airline partners are so desperately in need of. So very quickly, just to wrap this up, can we flip a switch? My answer is no, we cannot. It will take some time. It will take a collaboration of all parties mentioned. However, it is doable, absolutely. We're proving it. It can be done.
Thank you. Thank you. And Ms. DeVivo, you answer the same question.
Yeah, similar. It's not a flip of a switch. It would take some time. You'd need to give us an opportunity to make sure we had budget dedicated, then to work with the FAA to work through the whole process of the manual update and laboratories. I mean, we're fortunate as a Hispanic serving institution to qualify for Title V and Title III grants, and have actually just added a state-of-the-art composites lab. So in some ways, we're ahead of the curve knowing this was coming, right? But it's unclear to us exactly what all the rule changes will look like, so having an opportunity to have time to implement would be helpful.
Yeah, excellent. Just a moment. Mr. Neely, can you kind of came up at the end of 5 minutes there. Sorry, I'm out of time. I know I'm going to take time. Can you address your veterans program, veterans outreach program?
Actually, it's
more directly.
I'm sorry. Actually, it's multiple programs. That the first layer, quite frankly, is taking advantage of the fact that we have so many veterans in our business, and they have colleagues that they worked with in the military, and so there's direct outreach, and that's true at all of the jobs within Gulfstream where we recruit veterans. The Another example is the Transition Support Program, where I'm sure you're familiar, active members of the military during the last, I think it's 6 months of their active service can go and work in industry. We're very much involved in that. We think that's a wonderful program. Two great examples.
That's great. Good, thank you. Thank you. I'll recognize Representative Graves of Louisiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've all described various steps and programs that we can take to help address this gap that was identified in some of the opening statements and the first panel's statements. 2 questions, and I'm happy to hear from any of you on this. Number one, excuse me, if we were to implement all of your recommendations, does that close the gap? Does it close the gap? Secondly, if you're us, mainly him, what's the one thing that Congress, and again, I can't emphasize this enough, a lot of times people like to jump out of their lanes and do other people's jobs, but what is the one biggest thing that Congress could work on to help address the gap that we're now facing and expect to be much greater in the future? Again, all of you? Don't pretend like you're shy.
So I would just want to reemphasize this idea of increasing Pell, especially for underrepresented populations, right? Our average family income's $39,000. They just don't have enough funding, right? The average debt load is about $17,500. Now they're going to get great paying jobs and be able to pay back that debt, but to make that choice, they could use some extra support. In New York, they've done things like dedicate, a certain amount of funding to STEM fields. Could Congress take that route, given that this is such a demand and such an area where we need extra support? Could they do some kind of supplemental funding for something like a student who wanted to pursue aviation maintenance? And I think all the things that have been discussed on this panel, the work that we're doing in Queens in terms of who we serve, we're going to close this gap. But you have to see it to be it, right? So getting more people into those role model positions will definitely change the story.
Great, thank you.
And I agree. Definitely funding is a huge part of it, especially for our school as well. But in addition, as you heard us state earlier...
Can I interrupt you on that? Just a quick question. So you talk about funding being an obstacle. So do all of you perceive the fact that aviation programs, particularly pilot and others, because of the specialized training and the length of training, that cost is one of the biggest barriers or obstacles?
So speaking on behalf of a high school, and again, a public high school, it's a bit different than a college or technical school. For us, for sure. We get funding from the city, state, and the federal Perkins grant, of course, but it's very, very expensive for a school to run. And for example, we get $500,000 for Perkins Act. It doesn't go very far. It looks like a big number on paper, but you're talking about aviation equipment and mock-ups and engines and aircraft that will eat up most of that money. So definitely funding for us is an issue, and we could definitely improve our equipment and experiences for our students. But I want to add, in addition to that, going back to the earlier statements on elementary and middle school, we definitely have a challenge as a high school of students coming in. They will work on their licensing. They'll learn to love aviation from our staff who are graduates of our school and also work in industry. But they've also heard college and university since they were born, understandably. So it's really a shift of mindset of looking at it as a lucrative career, and definitely Delta paying out a large part of their profit sharing definitely helps, and all the wages that are going up across industry is definitely helping as well. But that's definitely a big part of it. If we're talking about high school students that are coming in at 14, applying to high school as a 13-year-old, it's the image and the allure of the field that we have to really promote younger. So if we can get students working with their hands, understanding how systems work, seeing what it might be like to do as a career, or at least portions of it, that would go a long way as well for us, especially.
Thank you. Others?
I support that as well. As the funding is a huge barrier. So, almost 25% of our applicants who have been accepted into our program cannot receive personal loans because we don't qualify for Title IV funding as of yet. So, that's a huge barrier. So these are applicants that, have the aptitude skills and they have, the motivation to get through a 12-month intense training program, but they just don't have the funds to do it. So if there were opportunities out there to help them, we would see more people coming through the program.
Ms. Donati, while you're on the mic, you run a successful pilot training program. now that you're migrating into repair, mechanic type activities, what are some of the lessons learned from the pilot training that we can apply to some of the other fields, including repair?
I believe it's all structure. So, as we are training for an airline, we are focused on replicating what the airline's needs are in a training environment. Under the apprenticeship program, the apprentices have to be with us for 30 months. So why not give them the most structured training environment for 30 months versus just checking off boxes that they know how to do something that won't correlate into Republic?
Yeah, thank you. We have Fletcher Technical Community College in our district, and they have actually brought in the real workers from the field, bring them into the classroom. They donate the equipment, and they have those folks that are going to be their bosses on day one in the workforce actually doing the training, and just these seamless transitions, of course, not in aviation space, but in other technical fields, and it's worked out really well. So thank you all very much. Yeah, yield back.
I'll now turn to Ms. Plaskett from U.S. Virgin Islands for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you all for your testimony and for the work that you're doing. Mr. McDermott, excuse me, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about your testimony. When you discuss in your testimony Delta's pride in paying competitive wages and investment heavily in workforce, can you talk about how that has helped Delta weather any workforce challenges in this strategically sustainable workforce? How is it making you more competitive?
Certainly from a brand standpoint, the Delta name is substantially out in the marketplace now as a great place to work. That certainly doesn't hurt. Delta contributes 1% of all our earnings back into the communities to be able to drive opportunities for people to be able to develop, to come to the workforce at Delta Airlines. And then our ability to go out into the marketplace, which we promote every city, every state, to go out and get involved within the communities, allows us to get into the schools to be able to work with our 50 aviation partners, AMT school partners, to be able to go out and actually drive interest in the aviation fields. That includes everything from us talking about pilots all the way through engineers as well as AMT mechanics.
So how do you create this collaborative nature of your work? You talk about the mentoring programs you have, collaborating with regionals. How does that work, and how are you able to sustain that?
We've actually reached out and approached all our regional partners as well as the AMP schools, and we developed a strategy early on. We know from the AMP perspective there were 3 things we were focused on. One is diversity and inclusion. The other one was community service, and then our overall volume of AMP mechanics we're going to need for the future. As we looked at our 35 maintenance bases that we have across the country, we tried to pair up those maintenance bases with local schools so we could make sure that we're actually engaged at that local level and providing the services that the schools would need and advisement the schools would need to be able to continue with their support. We did the same thing with our regional partners. We're going to do the same thing and continue to be able to expand the program, and we have to make sure we keep up with the overall pipeline strategy to get that, to get our needs filled for the future.
Great, thank you. I'm wishing you continued success in that, and that it be an example for others on how to get that done. And just keep talking with us. I'd love to talk with you more about how you're able to keep that collaboration going. Mr. Jackson, I don't have any questions for you, but just wanted you to know, although I represent the Virgin Islands, I was born and raised in New York City, and everyone knows how the great success of Aviation High School. In my own middle school at Grace Lutheran in Queens Village, that was someplace that a lot of young people in my class applied to your school, so thank you for the tremendous work that you're doing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up about with Ms. Donati about the Lift Academy. Some of the work that you're doing is really incredible, and I was hoping that you could talk a little bit more about some of the certification and how you're able to improve the supply of maintenance technicians and mechanics in the field.
So last year we were approved for an aviation maintenance technician apprenticeship program through the Department of Labor. And we have reached out and partnered with Indiana high schools as well as career technology centers to find students who have the mechanical aptitude who'd be interested in a career in aviation. These students are provided compensation day one, and it's an earn and learn model. So they are working under supervision of a licensed A&P. So hands-on experience in the hangar, and then classroom experience as well, to ensure that they will be ready for their tests with the FAA at the end of the 30th month.
Great. I have no further questions. Thank you so much for having this hearing and us being able to question and learn about these best practices in the field.
Thank you. I recognize Representative Woodall of Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask you, Ms. DeVivo, thinking about the different programs that you all have and the stamp of disapproval that our high schools are well aware of going into that maintenance workload. You've got certificate programs, you've got bachelor's programs. Is there a greater demand for your bachelor's of science in aviation maintenance than there is for a certificate program in aviation maintenance, just to try to get beyond that stigma that mom and dad put in your head?
So the way that we have our program structured is you have to finish the certification program before you can get into a bachelor's degree. So, and what will often happen, and is especially true right now because they're paying so well, is that students go off as soon as they've been certified, and then will come back to us at some later point for the bachelor's science degree when somebody else is going to pick up the tab.
But the almighty dollar has motivated folks to use their value today, not to just get a piece of paper that may add no additional value to them today.
Correct. And the airlines are not necessarily interested until they're in a manager's or supervisor's role. What they really need is to be certified.
Ms. Donati, I was really interested in what you said to the chairman, that you could flip the switch tomorrow, because I don't want to misquote you, something to the effect of, we are actually training our folks for what our customers demand, so we're just backwards training to meet FAA requirements. But if we get rid of those outdated requirements, we'll just keep teaching the skills, well, that we are teaching, because these are the skills our customers demand. Is there something, as you look forward, that you're thinking in this fall, when the new standards come out, that you're going to have to improve your curriculum because you're not preparing folks properly for your customers' needs today?
I would like to emphasize an apprenticeship program is much different than a 2-year or 4-year degree program. So we have the flexibility in our program. We don't have the high cost of operation. We don't have sheet metal stations and painting labs and welding. So in that sense, we can quickly adapt to what the FAA needs us to teach. We are teaching everything in the curriculum to meet the certification of the apprenticeship program, but if there was anything that they would introduce that we're not currently teaching now, we just add that into their time with us. So again, dope and fabric, we're teaching it, but we don't have a station designated for that, so therefore we don't have to have the expense of updating our equipment.
Mr. Neely, because we are focused on safety, and I do believe you care more about your customer safety than any of us on the dais do, what is it that you expect to see this fall in terms of a new government training standard that you're not training your current mechanics and maintenance personnel up to that standard today?
Works better if I push the button. So you're absolutely right. We are focused like a laser beam, as the saying goes, on our customer safety and our employee safety, quite frankly. The two go hand in hand. We do have extensive in-house training capabilities. We have an OJ, on-the-job training facility that we built over the last number of years that has real Gulfstream aircraft in them, modern Gulfstream aircraft, where new hires and more experienced workers can come in, update their skills, do recurrent training, et cetera. So you're right, we are already doing for our own employees all of the work that we think they need to have the right skill sets. We do that internally, we do that with our partners at Flight Safety, which is a training organization we use both for pilots and for obviously our maintenance personnel. There's certainly a role clearly there's a role for the FAA in regulations related to that training, and we very much look forward to seeing the new regulations, and hopefully it allows for a lot more flexibility.
And tell me about that role, because I think there's clearly a role for the FAA in terms of safety, but you are not going to allow an unqualified mechanic to be on your line. Delta's not going to allow. If you come to Delta and you're not prepared, Mr. McDermott's going to train you up, or he's going to move you on I'm trying to understand what the benefit is, what the value add is of 60 years of government stumbling down the pavement on promulgating new training standards. Of course, in 1940, this was a conversation, and 50 and 60, but in 2020, you all have to be ahead of us. As good as our chairman is, you have to be moving faster than we are. I'm trying to understand if our role needs to continue to be to set a floor of standards, or if our role needs to be to set some safety standards for an airline that then you all will hire and your training partners will train to meet those globally, not line by line.
Right. So I think this concept of having the safety regulations that are more flexible and less detail prescriptive. I think there's actually some precedent in that, and some of the other parts of the FAA. There's a lot of benefit to that because it allows the FAA themselves to be a lot more nimble and ensuring that their people that are part of the team that we're a part of. We, Mr. McDermott, myself, Gulfstream, the FAA, et cetera, for overall safety, but that flexibility, I think, is key because technology, as you pointed out, technology is moving at the speed of light these days, and that is especially true on the maintenance side of the airplanes, no doubt about it.
Mr. Chairman, if you've had a hearing with two finer Georgia companies represented, I can't remember when it was, so thank you for doing that today.
For the record. So noted. I don't think 2.5 hours exhausted this subject, but I do think there's more work to do. I think you have outlined very well a good curriculum for the FAA and Ms. Lang to follow up on as well, and we'll look forward to tracking the progress of the rule as well as some of these initiatives we discussed today. I see no further questions from members of the subcommittee, and seeing none, I want to thank each of the witnesses today for your testimony. The contribution to today's discussion was very informative, was very helpful. I ask unanimous consent the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing, and unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. That objection so ordered. If there are no members have nothing else to add, the subcommittee stands adjourned.